I think one thing to point out, which is, I think, the most important and kind of catalyst in LA is CicLAvia, which you're very familiar with. I'm sure it is the largest open streets event in the United States. We have had over 50 events. They used to be, a few times a year. Now there's not only the ones that are planned within the city of LA, but also smaller cities have their own offshoots. They closed the 110 freeway last year, which was wild. There are people, which is actually the second time they had done it. It had been done a while ago, like 20 years ago. These are the kind of things that show the demand of how much people are really ready for a different way to experience their city, and how many people just have bikes and would love to ride them if it felt safe on a regular basis with our infrastructure that we have. So my kids, I always say they've never known a world that isn't CicLAvia. When they were younger, they actually thought the CicLAvia was happening all the time and we just weren't taking them, which is, I love the idea of just in your mind and that's going on somewhere else.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Simmerman and that is Alissa Walker with Torched.LA, a new newsletter that has been launched in the run-up to the 2028 Olympics being hosted in Los Angeles. So let's get right to it with Alissa. Alissa Walker, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast once again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I do say once again because this is a return trip for you. You were on way back in season 1, episode 20.
Oh my God! Wow.
Do you remember when this was?
Well, it must have been when I had first maybe joined Curb, or in the early years when there was a Curb.LA.
This was actually May of 2020. So we were in the early stages of major lockdown.
So the photo is an older photo. Okay,
photo's an older photo, but season 1,
photo.
episode 20, we were in the throes of the lockdown from the pandemic.
That's right.
And for me, this, the whole podcast was a shift. It was me shifting over to what I had been doing, which was traveling around, filming a documentary following some People for Bikes cities that were implementing the Big Jump project, and then I'm like, okay, I can't do that anymore. There's no more travel. What am I going to do? And so I started a podcast. You were nice enough to come on, and again, that was in the first 20 episodes. You were episode number 20, and so it was wonderful catching up with you. For those people who don't really know who you are, why don't you give the 30-second version of who Alissa Walker is?
Sure. Well, yeah, as the slide said, I'm a journalist focused on urban issues, I guess. Started out writing about architecture about 20 years ago. And design, and then just started to do more writing about cities and transportation, policy, climate. And as of this year, I started a newsletter that is focused on everything leading up to our LA's mega event era. So this is the World Cup coming up, another Superbowl, and then the Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2028.
And here you are, and this is in fact your landing page to Torched. and so yeah, you started this. Gosh, when was it? It was in the spring, right?
This April. Yeah, I think it was April.
Yeah, fantastic. And in fact, let's pull up that post. This is introducing Torched. Boom, right here. Share with us. I mean, what was the background? What inspired you to, bring this up, answering your burning questions, introducing Torched here. And I love your tagline to Torched. It's basically, what is it? It's right here. Boom, 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 boom. Where is it? It's at the end. There. So LA doesn't get burned.
Yes, I realized the name. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a torch as part of the games. I've got some paraphernalia up, behind on the wall behind me. You can see the Olympic, the '84 Olympic poster with the stars and motions. And then I have like this around me all the time too, which is the brand book from the amazing urban design and graphic design that was all over the city by Deborah Sussman. But yeah, the torch was like, yes, obviously there's a torch, and a lot of cities have been burned by hosting these mega events. But also, it's going to be really hot. It's the Summer Olympics. All these events are happening in summer, with the exception of the Super Bowl. And we are not prepared as a city, as a region, for the effects of extreme heat on a regular day, and let alone 4 years from now, when millions more people will be trying to get around the city and what are supposed to be the car-free games. So I'm alarmed. I think a lot of people are alarmed. And what can we do to maybe fix that, not just for these visitors, but for people who have to do that every day in our city?
Yeah. And the image that we have on screen right now, and we'll describe this for the listening only audience, is a beautiful image, but it dates back to the first time that LA hosted the Olympics. Why don't you explain what we're looking at here?
Yeah, I think this is like one of our, we didn't build a lot of venues for the games, right? That's kind of been our promise to everybody, that LA is, not, going to assume this big financial risk, and we're not going to have these like empty shells of, stadiums all over the city. But what we did do in 1932, because we've hosted the games twice previously, is we planted about 30,000 palm trees along the streets of Los Angeles. This is actually my street, which is lined with palm trees. And I believe that they were planted around that time. As far as I can tell, I live on the street from the 1932 palm planting. And it's kind of debated why exactly it was done. Remember, it was the Depression. They were trying to put people back to work. There were all these big, programs happening all over the country. But as far as I can tell, the boosters did convince the city to spend the money to plant these palm trees. And it was meant to look, exotic to the visitors, or, give this like, maybe even like a tropical or resort vibe, to the area. But if it had literally been any other tree, the city would be completely different. And, just from like a shade perspective, just from a, when you're walking around, you would feel like maybe there might be an urban canopy above your head instead of this tiny little pom-pom on top of a toothpick that is what we're more used to.
Yeah, yeah. And these palm trees, I mean, they are iconic now for Southern California because of that, that process of planting a bunch of these, and they end up making some beautiful pictures. Like this particular photo is gorgeous, that you snapped with the nice pink in the clouds and everything, and it does conjure up this like paradise thing. And thinking back to 1932, yeah, the height of the Depression and challenging times, but also getting to Los Angeles if you're coming from the East Coast. I mean, air flight wasn't a common thing. I mean, a lot of these people who would come, to Southern California, that's a long train ride.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, remember that? Like, we used to have trains.
Right. Well, still do. People are always like, oh, the car-free games. I'm like, well, technically we kind of did it the first time, because in 1932, we had one of the largest streetcar networks in the world. And so there was like really there's really a lot of communication even back then about how to get people to the various venues, using streetcars. They also had a extra, kind of bus fleet to move people around, which is what we used in '84 and what we're going to use again in 2028. But then there are some funny stories that I found about, there were a lot of people who did have cars, and there was questions about if you could park at the venues, which is so funny because we're doing that same thing now, where we're trying to figure out how to keep the cars away. But except there, they were almost being like welcoming to cars because they were kind of like a new way to get around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know if your ears were burning at all or not, but last week's guest, last week's episode was with Jeff Wood from up in San Francisco, and we were talking a little bit about the games, and I had mentioned to him, yeah, I'm going to be having you on the podcast. We're going to talk about the Olympics and everything. And one of the things that I mentioned is that I had the opportunity to travel to both London and Paris over the summer. I was over in Europe for 2 months, interviewing folks, doing on-bike interviews, filming, and I specifically wanted to see the Olympic Park in London to kind of get a sense as to, okay, they built out a lot of infrastructure, and then they had this whole vision for what the village would be, the Olympic Village. And I had heard that, guess what? It's being developed as like this whole new urbanism, residential community. So I wanted to get some eyes on it to really get an idea what that looked like. And so I shot some video of that. Then I was off to the Velocity conference the next week, and then the week after that, or the weekend after that, I was in Paris for 3 days. And I also wanted to understand and get a sense as to, okay, how car-free is the Paris Games? And so I was on the ground there filming, getting an idea as to what the status was, because I kept hearing from everybody, oh man, you gotta get to Paris, you gotta document it, it's amazing what they've done. And I said, well, guys, I was just there in 2022, 2 years ago, and it was not car-free. And it was, they're making great progress. I'll give it to that, especially some of the bold moves that Mayor Hidalgo is doing. But the streets were still incredibly hostile 2 years ago. So I had to be there. I had to do that. And, spoiler, if you haven't watched my videos, it's like, yes, some amazing things have happened, but the streets were incredibly car choked and incredibly hostile. And the drivers were still very, very aggressive on those busiest of the boulevards. Although I did give credit and say that some of the great things that did happen were some of the side streets have become much more pedestrian friendly, and the school streets program is phenomenal. And so huge
great.
credits and kudos to that. Now,
yeah,
that was
200
1
schools,
month.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was 1 month prior to the games. So who knows? Maybe magically those cars got booted out a month later, but that's the context that I had. Was I'm very interested in the 2028 games. Naturally, I'm a fourth generation Los Angelino. You mentioned the streetcar lines. Both my great-great-grandfather and my great-great-great-grandfather worked on the red car lines there in the downtown area at the turn of the century. And so I have deep roots in LA and have a vested interest in wanting to see the best step forward for, Los Angeles as a region and as a city. So let's talk a little bit more about what you're talking about with Torched, because you have this love affair like I have with LA, and you don't want to see them torched. You don't want to see them get burned.
It's true. I mean, we all want the same thing. We want the city to be better because this happened, not worse. And we want, but I think we can only ask so much of these organizing committees or sponsors. They're going to do their thing. It doesn't really matter to us in the long run. It's really up to the decisions that our leaders are making. And it's been alarming to see how much time we had to plan for this. Remember that we were awarded the games the same year as Paris. It was this special dual award ceremony because nobody wanted to host the games at all. So we were kind of the two last bidders for 24, and they said, why don't we just give LA 28 at the same time? Then we don't have to worry about it. Which was smart on their part, because then it was COVID, and then there was all the other issues with hosting and even delaying the games a year when it was in Tokyo. So that gave us maybe some inertia in a way, because it was so far away. This was 2017. Games are in 2028. I wrote a story in 2018 for Curbed about all the transportation stuff that had happened in 84, because what happened in 84 is, again, nobody wanted the games. And we had decided to have it in LA with these same kind of promises about, we're not going to build anything. Don't worry about traffic. We're going to move everyone around in buses and tell people kind of not to get on the roads if they don't have to be. And it was this magical few weeks in LA where the freeways were clear and you could get anywhere you needed to. The skies, weren't smoggy, all these things. There were no big traffic, crises or anything. But we're going to use the same playbook, I guess, as that this time. And we haven't really spent public money to build stadiums. But now all of a sudden there's this getting to the crunch of the 4 years and you're starting to see, well, actually our streets and sidewalks are in pretty bad shape. And yes, we've invested a lot of money in our subway system and our light rail system, but we don't have bus lanes for the buses, which are the workhorses of our, the backbone of our transit system. We don't have bike lanes still. We have a few, but they're not really safe and you can't really get places, without a car in a reliable and comfortable way. So I think there's a kind of a big reckoning, kind of drifting through, city government at various levels. It's not just LA. There's Long Beach. There's all these, separate cities that are hosting, like Inglewood, that are hosting a lot of the games too. And I think what keeps coming up for me is what is the overall regional collective vision that we have for what's going to happen in the next 4 years, and how can we start to align those a little bit more so we're all kind of can pool our resources or try to get somewhere together instead of everybody kind of doing this infighting a little bit about who gets what.
Yeah. Well, and your most recent post, which was yesterday, is LA has a plan, and this really kind of addresses a part of the challenge that you just mentioned, which is, yes, we've got a lot of deferred upkeep and maintenance of infrastructure, and this was huge. So the mayor signed this executive directive to do what and why does this matter, and why does this relate to what you just talked about in terms of lack of sidewalks and protected and safe all ages and abilities cycle network facilities?
Yeah, it's nothing new to anybody listening to this or watching this because your city probably has one. And we are the only major city in the United States to not have a capital infrastructure plan, which is basically just planning ahead a couple of years on what you're building as far as public infrastructure and how much it costs and what the deadlines are. We do our planning 1 year in advance. We have a giant budget of that kind of gets fought over by all of our council members who all want their little piece of money, but there's no kind of unified strategy for how we spend it. And there's no real vision for you're showing this sidewalk. Our sidewalks are so bad that we had a lawsuit brought against us 10 years ago by people with mobility disabilities. About half the sidewalks are not in good repair, and it hasn't really improved, even though we were sued and made this big splashy agreement saying that we were going to fix them. Because there still was no real plan for how do we do this at scale and how do we address other problems at once. So you could see these giant ficus trees next to this, freshly repaired sidewalk. This is a rarity, but the trees and the sidewalks are kind of having this battle on every block in LA because we need the trees and we need the shade, but that they ruin the sidewalk. So this is one of the thing I keep pointing to is we need to think about this differently. Can we widen the sidewalks? Can we put the sidewalk on the other side? Can we put a raised bike lane up instead of, the share or whatever? Can we look at the street as a whole, ecosystem for getting around the city and for every mode to make them feel safe and comfortable and dignified, instead of just, we're going to money the sidewalk, but then, we might have to cut down the tree and then we're digging that up again. There's a whole, it's just an overlapping, layer cake of all the different fixes we're trying to make without really addressing literally the root problem, I guess, in this example.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that. And again, channeling the poster that's behind you from 1984 in the Olympics there, and I'm wearing my USC Aloha shirt here, because that's 1984 was my freshman year there at USC in Los Angeles, and I didn't get a chance to actually experience the games in the summer of 1984. I was there again like the month prior for my walkthrough as an incoming freshman, and then I went back home up to the little ranch community that I lived in up in Northern California. I came from a community of like 4,000 people, tiny little town, and I lived on a small ranch outside of town. And so LA was, even though I'm originally from there, LA was like, the big city for this, small town kid. I grew up there since 1972 when my parents fled from the big earthquake that happened in 1970. And so, that's kind of the backstory on that. But the reason I bring that up is I wanted to mention what you were just talking about with these trees and the interaction with the sidewalks, is I can remember riding my bike, especially along some of the beautiful tree canopied neighborhoods near the Los Angeles Country Club in that area. The final 2 years at USC, I lived in a historic Victorian home, not far from Western Avenue in that area. And so I used to ride my mountain bike through these wonderful tree canopied streets that gave that shade, the so much desired shade and limited resource of shade. And I would ride all the way up to the fire roads up back behind the Hollywood sign, be able to get up there and do that. So it was like a couple of us, a handful of us in the early 1980s who had mountain bikes, because it was before the explosion of mountain bikes, and then the equestrian riders who were riding on those fire roads up back behind the Hollywood sign. But yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting challenge and battle that we have, because you're absolutely right. There was literally a consent decree about the fact that the sidewalk network was in such disrepair and was not conducive from an all ages and abilities perspective. And you don't want to get rid of the trees. You have to have trees. We have to have a good tree canopy. Hopefully it's not those palm trees. Hopefully something that's actually giving some legitimate shade, like some of those neighborhoods that I remember. And it is an interesting balance, but you kind of touched upon that in the sense of rethinking how these corridors are actually even thought about, because if we're going to try to preserve those trees, maybe the real solution is maybe we need to be rethinking what the streets are for.
Yeah. Why do we give so much space? Yeah. Why do we give so much space to the cars and the first? And this picture actually, there used to be a creek here. Like obviously, the creek needs to be replaced more than the 3 lanes of traffic or whatever that are going by there. So yeah, I really do think. I mean, the city has a lot of great plans. We have. A lot of even like county-wide plans. We have like something like Measure M, which is funding our transportation, build out from like, our public transit agency. We have something called Measure W, which is about like pulling up pavement and stormwater interventions. And, this is like a perfect example of like why we need to expand our tree wells or put, little bioswales in along. So we do have a lot of really good plans, but they are not reflected in our public infrastructure all the time. So maybe with that as a goal for 2028, we can move towards that. But again, for everyday people, we need that too.
Yeah. Now, and you mentioned too earlier about the heat stress that's involved with the fact that, in the summertime, that basin, the Los Angeles basin area, has a tendency to just start really, really baking. And that's, it's a very unlivable type of situation, which, brings up, you were just talking about, opportunities for more livable environment, opportunities for, incorporating some bioswales and bringing some more green into that environment to try to bring down that heat stress, the heat effect that takes place with all this paved surface. And it brings me along to another recent episode that I had with Lindsay Sturman, with the Livable Communities Initiative, LCI, there in Los Angeles. And it also makes me think of the other recent interview that I did, which was with Michael Schneider in season 7, episode 255, with the Streets for All initiative. Y'all have got a whole bunch of groups doing some really good stuff in LA right now. I'm loving it because I'm able to live vicariously, not only through your newsletter, but also the good work that and the teams that of folks that are doing things there. I mean, you've been on the ground there in LA for how long now?
23 years.
So in that couple decades, in the 23 years that you've been there, I mean, is this like the most kind of like urbanism and active mobility and transit and housing for everybody energy that you have seen in the basin? I mean, it seems to me like there's a lot of good groups doing some stuff. Not that necessarily everything's getting built.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say the energy from the groups is good. As far as the leadership that's doing the implementing, we're not in that. There was stuff going in the ground probably 2 mayors ago, better. And I wouldn't like discount the efforts that Metro is making, because obviously what they've accomplished is huge. Like, we have a basically like fully funded transit system. We don't need to collect fares, really. We have our infrastructure basically paid for. We have a sales tax that we voted on, so that, LA County sales tax. So that kind of Metro just keeps cooking, and we're the only really North American city doing this type of infrastructure building. As far as we're tunneling, we're extending our purple line, D line to Westwood, which is another goal for the Olympics. We're building light rail, and we just launched a new light rail line in the valley, which is really exciting. So we're really that stuff is huge. It makes a big difference. But like I said before, the majority of our riders are in buses, stuck in traffic with everyone else. This is like that's a great post to pull up. So this is Jody Litvak, who is this like legend at Metro. She's called the most hated woman in Beverly Hills for trying to get the subway to go under Beverly Hills. Obviously, they prevailed, and it's going to open pretty soon. But her point was really like, Metro can only do part of the work. We need the cities to really pitch in. And yes, things like HLA getting passed, which was just basically the voters saying you have to implement your mobility plan, this network of bike and bus lanes that you promised. You vote. The city council passed it and said they were going to implement this plan. They promised us, and then they haven't really implemented it. So that's kind of seen as a mandate now for, yes, everybody agrees. And now when new bike projects go in, or bus stuff, I think people expect that to be happening now. There's a lot of buses around that do have really good bus lanes, but when like new bike projects go in, we just have a new really great facility on Hollywood Boulevard, which is going to be connecting the eastern part of Hollywood with the Walk of Fame, with this really nice project that could be that kind of holistic street redesign that we're talking about. People just kind of see it now as like, oh, well, this is the way it is. We voted for bus and bike lanes. So that's really great. That's important to be able to say, everybody, you can point to each neighborhood. Even at the press conference for the Hollywood bike lanes, the council members were both there being like, this neighborhood voted 80% for HLA and this neighborhood voted 70% for, so you can say that people want these things. But
let's pause on that for just a second. We'll come back to your but, because I know where you're going to head on this, but I want to really emphasize just how impactful HLA was of being able, for those politicians to be able to be at a ribbon cutting or a community opening for a protected bike lane and say, hey, these communities were voting for this. And we see the same thing in cities, around the globe, that if you ask them, do you support having all ages and abilities facilities for active mobility? Overwhelming numbers come out. The 60, the 70, the 80%, come back and say, yes, we would use this. We do support this. etc. So it's only a minority of populations, very vocal minority, are against, active mobility infrastructure, safe and inviting all ages and abilities facilities. But that brings us back around to what we were just talking about earlier, is having the ability to fund that intelligently, and that's where the CIP comes in. Being able to actually have that capital improvement plan process in place so that you can actually implement the program that is on the plans, which is the active mobility network plans that HLA was saying is like, look, you've got great plans, just build it. And they can't build it if they don't have the plans, for actually implementing from a capital perspective.
Right. And so we're not replicating efforts. And the group that has been, for 7 years, I think really pushed this to the forefront is Investing in Place. And Jessica Meany, who, go look their work up. They have been, really pushing this like singular vision for the CIP is the solution that we need to at least try. It just doesn't make sense that LA would be the only city that wouldn't need one. That doesn't make, we think we're exceptional in a lot of ways and that we don't need to try things. But what's also exceptional in LA is our rate of pedestrian fatalities. I mean, and honing in on like just the data specifically in the last few years, like it's gotten worse, where a lot of cities have been able to make pretty significant improvements. And that's, of course, the infrastructure. Like it's obvious. I went and visited Hoboken last summer and like saw they haven't had a single traffic death in years. And that was a very concerted effort after, a very tragic death of an elder in the community. The mayor, this amazing Mayor Ravi Bala, literally said, we're not doing this anymore. We're going to fix the problem on every corner. And it's gorgeous. Like, it's not just like, nice crosswalks and sidewalks and, but there's like really nice trees and benches and trash cans everywhere. So like you can make these places better to be.
Exactly, and I think that's the entire point. In fact, Mayor Ravi was literally on a press release for Strong Towns in the Crash Analysis Studio earlier this week, and he was talking a little bit about, the fact that, this is not a war on cars. This is, really trying to create communities that are people-oriented and safe and inviting environments. And so it's like, yes, we can do that. And I think that it's up to 7 years now without a fatality, there in Hoboken. And Jersey City is another city with Mayor Patel there. There's another great shining example of what can happen when you invest in the appropriate infrastructure. And I think the key thing for both of those cities, which is really, really important to emphasize, is they have mobility choice. And that brings us back around to our photo that's in frame here with our nice boring machine here. But I want to get to the title of this particular post because her whole point was that, hey, if the ground hasn't been broken yet, these big infrastructure projects are not going to be ready in time because they do take years. To your point from earlier, there is no other North American city that I can think of that has been moving as fast as LA has over the past decade in building out and trying to rebuild that network of transportation that existed back when my ancestors were working
That's right.
on the red car lines.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really is something, and you can tell the difference. Our ridership has also, I think it's 22 months of straight growth. We're about to surpass our pre-COVID ridership, which is really exciting. That would put us ahead of a lot of other cities. We're now have a higher overall ridership than Chicago, so it's New York and then LA, and that's really great. That says we're doing something right. That also says that people rely on transit to get to work, and it's not people that are working from home, obviously, because they haven't been able to change their commuting habits. So they're right back on the buses, they're right back on the trains. What's really interesting too about Metro's data is how much of it is special events. So they're talking about, a lot of their increase in their ridership growth has been people taking it to, sporting venues, which is perfect if we're trying to prepare for that to be a major driver of growth in the next few years. So
yeah. Now, you all had a big event just recently that really kind of celebrated and talked a little bit about this festival trail concept. Talk a little bit about what this is all about and what its connection, the festival trail, is to the prospect. Well, not the prospect. The games are happening. This is the prospect. Can we have something that's, that kind of links everything together, so to speak? Not everything.
Yeah. 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 This is the, the part that I was talking about before, the missing links that, you can get to a train station, but can you easily get from the train station to, somewhere else in the city that you need to go? This is a concept called the Festival Trail. It's a coalition of a bunch of different groups that have been working together to just kind of get grassroots support at the moment. They've had over, I think, 200 with stakeholder or just interested groups and stakeholders all over the city and beyond the city, outside of LA as well. So it would go from literally start at LAX and try this kind of diagonal path through the city, trying to hit as many of the venues as you can along the way. But then also linking up, and this is a really important part. It's not just like a trail, to get to, the football games or whatever, the football stadium. But it's linking up a lot of the existing trails and bike lanes and bus lanes, and all these other corridor projects that we're working on. So you really can connect car-free infrastructure with other car-free infrastructure. And I think that's what we're really missing too, is this kind of, we have the LA River Greenway, which has gaps. And then we have some other examples of kind of cool projects like this that also have gaps. And if this could be something that could be put in place as part of the games, most of it's traveling on existing trails and paths and infrastructure that are already separated, but there'd be a few places where it would just need to maybe have a lane of traffic. It seems like it's a good idea. So hopefully the leaders at the cities can start to embrace it and officially endorse it, because I think this is just something that will not only actually help, alleviate some of the traffic concerns, but also just make it nice for people who have nothing to do with these games as they're in town. You really want people to be able to enjoy things in their own neighborhoods or go to these little viewing parties. You see the rendering here is kind of like the shade structure where you could be watching a game, have some food trucks nearby. And that's the kind of thing we're also really missing in the city. We don't have a lot of public plazas or truly public, spaces where we can hang out with our neighbors. So I love the idea of adding these types of interventions, all over the city.
Yeah, yeah. And not to belabor the point, but, outside of a couple of months of the year when it's really, really hot, most of the time in the LA Basin region is just kind of perfect weather for walking and biking.
Such a shame that we're not taking better advantage of that.
Yeah. What other things would you like to share about Torched with the audience here?
Sure. Well, I think one thing that's pretty cool that I've been trying to do is, I did an event like these Zoom type of events, these Torch Talks. That was one of them. That was with Chris Torres, who is one of the leaders of the Festival Trail Project. I'm going to continue to be doing those type of Zooms where you can come in, drop in, and chat. And then I'm also going to be doing like in-person events and tours. Just had a launch party. That was just a party, but it was really fun. But some of the things coming up are like tours of previous legacy improvements. So one of our most famous legacies from '84 is ATSAC, which is basically a traffic control system that is like in this bunker underneath our Civic Center, where they literally in '84 were so worried about, some kind of traffic mishap occurring during the games that they started to go out and install cameras all over the city. So most major intersections, they have the ability to look at what's going on. And then they have, timing to improve flow. So we're going to go down and check that out. But also, I'm a little bit like, did we cede so much power to the free flow of cars, that maybe we forgot about some of these other modes. So how can we make ATSAC, it be a little bit better to help our trains and buses get through traffic now. So that's kind of been on the top of my mind. But yeah, just getting out in the city and seeing what's left and what we want out of the next 4 years. I'm hoping to just, really bring up people's concerns, help them like bubble up to the top. And there's a lot of concerns, but also just like what people think we should be getting out of this. And that is, things like the green spaces. Those were promised in the original bid, but they haven't really, I don't see them happening. They'll be temporary, but can we make them permanent? Can we be able to keep these cool gathering places in our neighborhoods and, green up the space?
You mentioned greening up the space, and that brings us around to another one of your recent posts here, which is how to fix the LA park crisis. One of the major goals of the Trust for Public Land is that communities, individuals should be within, a 5 to 10 minute walk from a park, a green space, a trail, an open space, some form of being able to recreate, but also being able to get a nature fix. And it's one of the biggest challenges that Los Angeles deals with. Talk a little bit about this creative, weird solution that you talked about here in this particular post.
Again, like most cities already do this. So we're just behind here. We're another good example of LA exceptionalism. But
hence calling it weird.
Yeah, that's why it's weird. People don't really think about this probably. When they think of LA, they think of it probably as like you said, like green most months out of the year and great weather, and we're all at the beach. But that those communities that are at the beach are significantly wealthier in most cases than the rest of the city. So from the most of us, the reality, including, my own family, my kids go to a blacktop schoolyard, LAUSD school in our neighborhood, in a very hot, unshaded environment. But then also like our nearest park is not that close by either. We're in one of those places that we're more than a 10-minute walk from a park, which is like 1/3 of the city, which is absolutely outrageous in a place, like you said, that has great weather and a lot to offer as far as like a natural, nature, access to nature. Like we have a giant municipal park in the middle of the city, Griffith Park. But it's not that close for everybody to get to. So we are 88th out of 100 in the Trust for Public Lands rankings, which is a drop. As long as I've been looking at this data, we've been going down, down, down. And so 88th out of 100. So you look at like the top cities, everybody's always well, how we're such a big city, we're so spread out, but like any way you dice it, we're way behind, like access, acreage, all that stuff. So one solution that has been talked about a lot is opening our schoolyards, which is the way that San Francisco, for example, got its 100%, 100% of the city. Again, much smaller city, but 100% of the city is within a 10-minute walk to a park. And they did that by opening and greening public schoolyards. LAUSD is the largest landowner in LA County. We have over 1,000 campuses that it could be this could be done. But the number that have been green to like park-like standards is like, I can count them on my hand. So it's a really cool program that has been launched by really one council member has really spearheaded it, Council Member Nithya Raman, and her office really kind of revived this idea that's been tried over and over again, literally for decades. But it seems like they have funding now, and they have like a dedicated staff person, and they also have a legal agreement for joint use with LAUSD, which was, I don't know, there's all the legal stuff and liability, of course, like this is maybe the hardest part. But so they're going to be opening schoolyards on the weekends in these like targeted areas that have, don't have good park access. But then the goal too is to prioritize some of these for greening projects. And the situation is dire. I mean, you look at the data of how much like a really nice park with like trees and grass and shade and stormwater interventions, and that can cool down a neighborhood by 6 degrees. They did all these studies where they looked at kind of like the heat coming off of different parts of the city, and the hottest parts of many neighborhoods are the elementary school playgrounds, which is like literally like you could land like a helicopter on, in these schoolyards. And that's how kind of barren and open and hot they are. So we've got to tackle this, for our kids, but also for our communities, because we need to give people more places to cool down. And this could be a great place to have those gathering places, for various mega events. If you want to play a World Cup game, if you want to, involve kids in like youth sports, this needs to be something that I think, the Olympics planning and Paralympics planning people need to be focusing in on, because it checks all the boxes of having, kids, doing sports and also cooling down the neighborhood. So
I'm going to take a sip from my Street Surfer People coffee mug here.
I don't have anything as well branded, but
the reason why I'm doing this is this brings up the what I mentioned earlier about school streets in Paris, and one of the interesting things about that concept of permanently closing the streets, around these schools, especially the elementary schools, and their process of greening them and turning them into permanent 24/7 space for kids is so brilliant, and it can be done fast. It's not one of those things that is necessarily completely breaking the bank in terms of capital investment. You can completely depave it and really make it beautiful, like this one right here. This is not in Paris.
So nice.
But this is a post that Tim Gill, who wrote the book Urban Playgrounds, just posted. This is not necessarily a school street. This used to be a surface parking lot, but the same thing. Of the same spirit of, hey, let's depave these asphalt playgrounds that are out in our schools. Let's depave some of these streets that really there's no reason that those streets need to be a traffic sewer. And you can solve a great deal of the challenge of school drop off and pickup if you transform it, depave it, and transform it into a much more of a living street. But this is an example of, I think, being able to have pavers and pavement when it's appropriate, but then other than that, what can we do to depave, bring some green, bring that heat island effect down, to your point, that that's just the heat stress that we're inflicting upon our children is just it's cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah, that looks amazing. I mean, we're voting on a few things. Hopefully by the time this airs, we'll have all this new bond money. We have a climate bond at the state level. We have all these things that can make a big difference. But yeah, just pulling up the pavement is something we seem to have a really big problem with here. Even though, like you said, the benefits are multiple. It's a multiple benefit effort, and we should be doing it as much as we can.
Yeah, and let's face it too. I mean, yes, we've talked a lot about the heat island effect, and that's hugely appropriate for the challenges that Los Angeles faces. But the other thing that Los Angeles faces is that when it rains, it pours. And right. Y'all have had some historic amounts of rain. And then that's where, again, when you have all this impervious cover everywhere and you're not able to really soak up and replenish, the groundwater and the aquifers, what ends up happening is you just have, a paved over environment. It creates flooding and it all just rushes out to the sea. And so a lot of these efforts of trying to, again, make our streets a little bit more people-oriented. Let's depave a lot of stuff. Let's get some, some rain gardens in place. Let's get some more percolation happening, and let's replenish those aquifers versus just having a massive flash flood out into the ocean.
And a lot of our bike infrastructure is, not just in the gutters of the streets that flood, but also in the actual rivers, like our greenways. Some of them are down, right along the channel. And when it floods or when it's unsafe or when we have mudslides or all sorts of things, you can't use them. You cannot use our bike infrastructure. So we need to really just completely rethink our definition of greenway. And maybe we do move it a little bit away from the river so it can just take a lane of traffic and make it so it's safe in all seasons.
Well, and to be quite honest, I mean, I'm very familiar with Boulder, Colorado. I lived there for a decade, and
That's where I went to college.
Yes, there you go. And so you may know this about the Boulder Creek Path and the whole network of off-street network of pathways that follow along the riparian corridors. And part of the reason why they were able to get that funded and get that done is because they realized that, hey, if we're able to bring these pathways that are next to the creeks, we can actually increase the size of the opening, for that future 500-year and 1,000-year flood that inevitably has been hitting, Boulder more frequently than every 500 years or 1,000 years. And it actually preserves the overall street network because you're not wiping out, the infrastructure, the automobile infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure at street level because there's more space and more volume. Yes, that's true. The bike lane needs to get cleaned up because, it's part of what happens is the floodwaters take over that space, but then you need to, get in there and clean that up. But guess what? The city's used to doing that because they actually plow when the snow hits, as you well know. They plow those bike and ped facilities first.
Amazing.
Before they do the streets. And so there's an ethic and there's a sensibility of saying, hey, we need to make it safer for people who are relying on active mobility to be able to get around and get to their meaningful destinations, including school, including work, including to the grocery store, including to their doctor's appointments. And so that's huge. So I see that there can be a balance on that, but it has to be done thoughtfully so that it's done. And here's a great message for other cities. If you're dealing with increased flooding risk, as almost every major metropolitan area is now in the area of climate change and global warming, this might be a way to be able to get more off-street network of pathways in, just do it intelligently so that, you're not putting people at risk. And at the same time, you can move quickly to get that reactivated if a flood does happen.
Yep.
Yeah, good stuff. So talk a little bit about Torched as a business product, because this is your job. So, what's the deal? How I know because I'm a subscriber. I'm subscribed.
Oh, well, thank you.
You are quite welcome. Please share with the audience what it costs to be a Torched subscriber.
Sure. I have 3 tiers right now, just denoted by flames, emoji flames. And you can obviously read all the content for free because it's like public information in my mind. So all the news or, all my reporting and all my coverage is always going to be free, no paywall. But what you do if you want to join for one of the tiers, you can get these really cool stickers. I don't have one in front of me, but they're awesome. And an invitation to an annual party that I hold. And then if you join at the next tier, you get to come to some of the events that that I've been talking about. Like some of them are open first and only in some cases to people who have subscribed at that next level. So we're going to be doing a lot of cool tours and in-person talks and in-person events that you can only have access to if you're at that next tier. And then if you're at the $1,000 a year tier, I actually do like a briefing, an annual briefing that can be customized to your whoever, if you're with a company or if you need something and information in particular catered to what you're doing as related to these mega events. I do kind of like, it can be a talk or it can be like a report or just a convening of some sort. And that way, what I'm really trying to do is like, funnel this knowledge, all this sometimes very useless information in my brain about all of this. And there's a lot but really be able to put it to good use. I know, like, particularly, like, a lot of something I've been considering is like creating like a nonprofit tier, because a lot of nonprofits, I don't want them to, pay the full top amount, but like really a lot of them are wondering a lot of the questions that, that everybody's asking, but they need to find a way to plug into the planning or just get like a readout of what's happening at City Hall or at these metro meetings. So I want to maybe find a different way to create a cohort of nonprofits who can, just all be in this together. Because I think a lot of it, we're all trying to figure out what's going on, and it's not very transparent. And there's no one place to go to get all the information. So I'm going to try to be that.
Yeah. Now you're going to have to fact check me on that. Make sure I did do the paid subscription versus the freebie. Maybe I'm freeloading on you. I don't know. we'll have to double check that and make sure.
This is worth a subscription.
So I wanted to also call out the fact that you do also, or are also, publishing with another architecture-related publication. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, there's a new publication in town. Actually, the launch, or like the second launch party, I guess, is tonight, or the day we're recording this. So the Los Angeles Review of Architecture is spin-off, I guess, of the New York Review of Architecture. I also have a hat somewhere, but it's not in front of me. And it's a printed paper publication, which is really exciting these days to actually see a story in print. And I think just what we're all, again, like journalism, we're having a tough time right now trying to figure out how to get paid, but also just how publications can be really useful for their readers. And I think in that way, we're very similar. We've kind of found a way to tell stories that are, have opinions, which doesn't work in every newsroom right now. A lot of people are just trying to kind of both sides things, or make sure they have access to powerful people. And myself and publications like, the New York Review of Architecture, LA Review of Architecture, I'm not afraid to question power and kind of be critical. So I'm excited that they exist, and that it's at least one more publication out there. And writing about architecture and urbanism and the built environment, obviously, like, it's hugely important because it affects people in ways beyond just, pretty building. So hopefully I can help keep contributing to that and support them as well.
Yeah. To close us out, I want to pull up this beautiful shot that you have out on your Threads page here, and also channel the fact that you all are parents too. And so, you're doing this not just because you're, a selfish, privileged professional that wants to be able to be the elite that gets around by walking and biking and taking transit. You are thinking about the next generation. So close us out talking about a little bit about the Los Angeles that you'd like to be able to bequeath onto the next generation in terms of being able to get around.
Yeah, this is a perfect example. I was also like taking a conference call while I was on this bike ride as well. So I was like on my phone.
Rocking my style. Like, all right.
Yeah,
yes.
just like a completely, it was very safe, very short call, but it was just the ultimate multitasking, right? The mom's has to get home from the train station really fast with her potted plant. Like, what do? You throw it on a metro bike and like take a call really quickly as you're going. But yeah, I think one thing to point out, which is, I think, the most important and kind of catalyst in LA is CicLAvia, which you're very familiar with. I'm sure it is the largest open streets event in the United States. We have had over 50 events. They used to be, a few times a year. Now there's not only the ones that are planned within the city of LA, but also like smaller cities have their own offshoots. They closed the 110 freeway last year, which was wild. There are people, which is actually the second time they had done it. It had been done a while ago, like 20 years ago. But these are the kind of things that like show the demand of how much people are really ready for a different way to experience their city, and how many people just like have bikes and like would love to ride them if it felt safe on a regular basis, with our infrastructure that we have. So my kids, I always say like they've never known a world that isn't CicLAvia. When they were younger, they actually thought the CicLAvia was happening all the time and we just weren't taking them, which is, I love the idea of just in your mind and that's going on somewhere else. And that's how they have learned to ride bikes and navigate through the city and take trains and buses. They're very avid transit fans as well. They know how to use the transit app to tell me that we could have gotten there faster on the train, which is often very true. But I would say also, like with my kids, they have such a innate sense of public space. And they really know like what makes a good playground and what makes a good splash pad. And they sure can point out when the city's doing something wrong. So I would say like listen to your kids. Like the school street idea sounds great. We're just trying to get our schoolyard not be an asphalt hellscape, but really let these kids plan and navigate and give them all the tools they need to and language to be able to describe what they want, because they're so right. Like we'll be walking somewhere and they'll be like, oh, there's not enough trees on this street, Mom. And then we have to have that whole conversation. Why can't we have more trees? So they also hate palm trees just as much as me. So I'm proud of that.
I have that love-hate relationship with palm trees because, yeah, it does bring back some pangs of nostalgia for what they are, but at the same time, from an urbanism perspective, they're completely useless when it comes to creating a shade canopy.
They're useless. So, yeah, they're fine, but they are useless. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned CicLAvia. I mean, one of the things that I love about open streets events is it helps to reinforce that concept that we've been talking about so much here, which is, again, streets are for people, and trying to reframe and reimagine what our streets are for can really help us open up the possibilities. Because, going back to the conversation we were having about the conflict between trees and sidewalks and whatever, just right off to the side there, we've got, excess space that's been developed or dedicated to the movement and storage of automobiles, which could really be repurposed and reimagined. And so having community events like open streets events, like CicLAvia's, really help to reframe the thought process, because ultimately none of this can really happen unless the political leaders within our communities feel like they're backstopped by true community support. And that's why I really, really emphasize that people, you've got to get involved. You've got to reach out, talk to your neighbors. You've got to talk to your entire block. You've got to get engaged with some of these organizations, that like Streets for People, or Streets for People, as well as LCI, to be able to Livable Communities Initiative, those programs like that, because that's how you grow the movement, grow the tent, get the tent bigger, so that really city leaders feel like, oh, wow, this would be political suicide if I didn't listen to the constituency. Because again, going back to the data that we were looking at earlier, is 60, 70, 80% of the population supports this type of transformation of public space. Yeah. So let's do it. Let's get it done.
It's true. I think everybody here knows that. I think our leaders know that. I think they pretend, they go out to the CicLAvia press conferences. They like those photo ops, but when it comes to putting the stuff in the ground, or in many cases of what we're talking about, taking the stuff out of the ground, they really they need the leadership and the political will. And shaming them until they get it, that works, but it needs to also be, it needs to also come from all of us. Yeah.
Well, I think there has to be a little bit of empathy too, for the fact that yes, this is hard to do. Like for instance, Councilmember Bonin, I think, when they were trying to do like a really nice protected bikeway in that particular district, and then we realized that the status quo will not just capitulate. I mean, oftentimes the minority of very, very influential and wealthy people who want to be able to drive their car as fast as possible between points A and B will put some political influence and pressure on city leadership to do it, even if they do feel like, oh yeah, this is the right thing to do. And of course, some of the city leaders like Monin and others were like, no, we need to do this right thing, this proper thing. This is good for everyone. But yeah, we have to be realistic about the fact and empathetic to the fact that, there's powerful pressures to be able to keep, the motoring party happening, the status quo of drive everything for everything all the time.
And I'll tell you two interesting stories, kind of a way to show that maybe we've moved past that. Mike Bonin, former council member on the West Side, very wealthy West Side community that I was talking about before. But in a road diet, faced recall battles. That project stayed in. It's really good. There was another project, though, on PCH, which is, right along... Well, actually, it's not technically part of the PCH. PCH is another very dangerous part of the road further north, but the road right along the ocean. Again, he put in some traffic safety, infrastructure. The people who were commuting from even wealthier communities further south, again, threatened with, recall, all that stuff. They took that out, and a bunch more people have died and sued the city. And they keep talking about we don't have money for these types of things, or we don't understand why traffic is so bad. They're real repercussions for, failing to, stand firm and keep the infrastructure. And I blame, the city 100% for backing down. Not Mike specifically, of course, like he had done a lot. But the big thing that's changed now is when the Hollywood project went in, these really nice new bike lanes. Hugo Soto Martinez, council member for Hollywood, they had shirts made that were advertising a road diet, and they were all wearing them around. And I was like, we've really changed now that we have council members at a booth at CicLAvia on Hollywood Boulevard, giving out shirts that are like, I love this road diet. So clearly something, it's hard not to get a little bit of emotional thinking about it, but I really saw that and I was like, okay, we've turned a corner here. So.
Well, you have, but I mean, and I like to say this, is that even though you may feel like you've got momentum and things are heading in the right direction, every single street transformation is a challenge. We have to have that empathetic understanding that these changes are fear-inducing to many people. And, for every success story, there's another example like in Culver City that happened where...
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I saw that being ripped out. That was hard. Yeah. Gutting. Yeah. They had a really great project, very small, but like literally the gold standard of quick build bus and bike architecture, infrastructure, and they just tore a bunch of it out. So yeah, but we got new people coming in. They're going to get elected and they can put it back better than before.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because absolutely, by the time this episode goes out, our elections will be done. And you had mentioned, you alluded to it earlier, that there might be some bond measures, but in whatever the outcome of that election was earlier this week or last week, I want to say this, is that, hey, elections do matter. And in addition to talking to your neighbors and, engaging and getting involved with your local community groups, it really does matter who we elect to public office at that local level, at the regional level, at the state level, as well as the federal level. So please, people, get involved, get engaged. It really matters that we grow the tent and that we have an appreciation, for what our streets can become and what our communities can become, because, we all deserve, every single person deserves to live in a place where, all ages and abilities can be able to get to meaningful destinations. All ages and abilities can be able to have access to green spaces and parks and places of respite from the day-to-day. And this has been such a wonderful pleasure catching up with you, Alissa. Thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast once again.
Thanks so much for having me. See you in 5 more years or whatever.
No. I've got to get home. I've got to get back to LA.
Over. Maybe, I'm like, maybe we'll compare notes after the games happen.
No. Let's do this. Let's make sure Active Towns is at the games. Let's figure out a way to get Active Towns to the game. We'll have a joint party. So the Active Towns and Torched, parties. And again, I want to emphasize
go ride the festival trail. Yeah.
Yes, and you do, like you said earlier, you do try to bring the community together. And I want to emphasize that you do try to bring your Torched community together that is growing, and have some fun things. In fact, you did some fun games too, right?
Oh yeah, we had a Jeopardy. I just was a contestant. I had nothing to do with it. But yeah, they had a Jeopardy. The great Devin Manny planned a Jeopardy event, we'll do that again too. It was really fun.
All right, let's make it happen before the Olympics.
All
I need to come visit you.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Alissa Walker. And if you did, please, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, I'd be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on that subscription button down below, and don't forget to ring that notifications bell. And if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts. Just head on over to activetowns.org and click on the support tab at the top of the page. There's several different options, including becoming a Patreon member. Patrons do get access to all of this video content early and ad-free, which is a pretty cool thing. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate the support. And until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers. And again, sending a huge thank you out to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, YouTube Super Thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit and purchasing things from the Active Towns store. Every little bit adds up and it's much appreciated. Thank you all so much.